Yeah. This is going to be great. A lot to talk about. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining the Hype Show. I am Big J all day, aka the Mighty Big J. Thank you so much for joining me on this Tuesday edition. If you guys, this is your first time, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. We definitely appreciate the support very much. And if you are not new, thank you again for joining me for another episode. This is episode 10 of the Hype Show, and we're going to be going over all the action from Sunday in the NFL and also discuss the Sunday night football game and the Monday night football game as well, and kind of go over all those highlights and take a small look ahead to Thursday night's game between the Chicago Bears and the Washington Commanders. So thank you so much again for joining me. The first game we are going to talk about took place in London. Again, I did touch on the final score, but we're going to go over the highlights again and the score and the stats from that game. That took place in London. The final score was the Jacksonville Jaguars defeating the Atlanta Falcons 23-7. Again, that game was played in London. That's one of the first of a few international games that's going to be taking place. And the Jacksonville Jaguars actually have another international game, which we'll touch on again here in a bit. They have another game on Sunday coming up against the Buffalo Bills. Again, final score 23-7. Jaguars improving to 2-2. The Falcons falling to 2-2 after starting 2-0. Looking at the statistics here for passing, Trevor Lawrence was 23 of 30 for 207 yards and 1 touchdown. Desmond Ridder, conversely, for the Atlanta Falcons was 19 of 31 for 191 yards, 1 touchdown, but he threw 2 interceptions. He actually had 3 fumbles, or actually 3 turnovers in total for the game. He had a fumble to go along with those 2 interceptions, so he had a total of 3 turnovers, which definitely turned out to be the difference in that game. As far as running the football here for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Travis Etienne, he had 20 carries for 55 yards, but did not find the end zone. And Trevor Lawrence himself had 8 carries for 42 yards as well to go along with the passing yards he had, but he didn't find the end zone as well either. For the Atlanta Falcons, rookie Bijan Robinson had another 100-yard day with 14 carries for 105 yards to go along with having 5 catches for 32 yards as well. So we had a total of 137 yards in total from scrimmage. Next on the list, a big drop-off was the backup Tyler Algier. He had 7 carries for 16 yards. So in total as a team, Desmond Ridder had the Atlanta Falcons had 127 yards on the ground to go with 191 through the air. So it was a decent performance overall as far as the offense. But again, 3 turnovers by the quarterback definitely spelled their doom. As far as the receiving statistics here for Jacksonville, Christian Kirk had 8 carries for 84 yards. Tight end Evan Ingram had 7 catches for 59 yards. Calvin Ridley had a somewhat quiet day, but he did find the end zone with 2 catches for 38 yards. The Atlanta Falcons, on the flip side, their tight end Jonnu Smith led all receivers on their end with 6 catches for 95 yards. Again, Bijan Robinson was behind him with 5 catches for 32 yards. And the touchdown that was thrown by Ridder went to Drake London, who had 3 catches for 28 yards. And another slow moving pace day for Kyle Pitts, the tight end, third-year tight end out of Florida for the Atlanta Falcons. He only had 2 catches for 21 yards and was targeted 4 times. As far as that goes here, as far as the tight ends, it's looking like Jonnu Smith is becoming looked at as the number 1 tight end for the Atlanta Falcons because he had 6 targets to Pitt's 4, and he caught all 6 of the targets he received for 95 yards. He had a very big day. He wasn't utilized very much in New England as well, which is why they parted ways after 2 seasons. So this is definitely a better fit for him. And Kyle Pitts, his rookie season in 2021 was his best season so far, and he hasn't been able to duplicate that success at all. So that's kind of one thing that's definitely hurting the Atlanta Falcons is the receiving core is decent. It's not something that's going to scare you. Drake London, he can get you touchdowns, but he doesn't have those days quite often where he has like 6 or 7 catches for like 80-something yards. He doesn't have them very often. And they're going to need more of that from him. Bijan Robinson, if defense is key in on him, they definitely can weaken that offense. And I feel like that's a lot of what Jacksonville did. So To me, Jacksonville, I expected them to win this football game, and that's definitely what occurred. 23-7 is about the score I expected, and they actually led at halftime 17-0. So they didn't have to do much in the second half. And looking at this team, Jacksonville, they've been very up and down. They started out the season 1-2 prior to going to England. So personally, if it's a situation where they can get more consistency out of this team, I think they can go a long way. But we'll talk about the other teams in that division in a moment because all the other teams in that division had very, very good games. The Colts lost their game in overtime to the Rams, but they had a splendid game. And Houston, they handled business just like Tennessee did. They both outscored their opponents very much. And we'll talk about those games here in a few. But Jacksonville, to me, looking at their schedule coming up here, we'll have to see what they can do against the teams coming up to see if they can hold true in their division because of their next 5 games coming up here, only one of them is divisional. Again, they're playing again in England coming up here October 8th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. That's another game in England at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium against the Buffalo Bills. The previous game was at Wembley Stadium, so just another venue, but still in England for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Following that, they'll be home against the Indianapolis Colts October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Then they have a quick turnaround for a Thursday night game, 8:15 Eastern on October 19th. That's a Thursday night football game. 10 days later, they'll have their game at the Pittsburgh Steelers October 29th. They have a bye week after that. Then they're home against the San Francisco 49ers November 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern. So for me, the Buffalo Bills game, we'll talk about Buffalo and how they fared against the Miami Dolphins this past Sunday, a little later in the broadcast. But Buffalo, that's going to be a test for Jacksonville if they can do anything. Buffalo's been pretty solid since their opening week season loss to the Jets. They've won 3 straight. So we'll have to see if they can do anything against Buffalo. Indianapolis has definitely surprised me, even though they're 2-2 as well. They've definitely surprised me in all their games so far. Even the one against Jacksonville to start the season, that one could have gone either way. You know, Jacksonville pulled out the late win. I just feel like there was a lot of inexperience on Indianapolis' part that played a key role in that loss, unfortunately. The quick turnaround Thursday night at the New Orleans Saints. That one can go either way as well. Derek Carr played in the game this past Sunday, but he just wasn't very effective. So I'm not sure if that shoulder is a factor or not in how he played, but they were very ineffective on playing their game against the Buccaneers, and they were at home too, which was kind of mind blowing. So again, 10 days later, they'll be at the Pittsburgh Steelers, 1 p.m. Eastern. They're having their own set of problems, but most of their problems that they're having are on offense, the offensive side of the football. Their defense is still playing well, but their offense isn't doing them any favors. And Kenny Pickett went down with an injury. They possibly believe it's an MCL injury, but they don't think he'll miss any time. And we'll touch more on that as far as Pittsburgh as a whole in a bit on this broadcast. But personally, at Jacksonville at Pittsburgh, that one could be a situation where they could go in there, and if they can get 24 to 28 points, Jacksonville, I think they could win that game because that offense just really hasn't shown that they can be explosive yet. They've had moments here and there, but I don't know if it's consistent for them. Again, they'll have a bye week after that Pittsburgh game, and that'll give them time to prepare for being at home against the San Francisco 49ers, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, November the 12th. That team is probably the most complete team right now to me in football. The Dallas Cowboys, they've taken a little bit of a hit on defense, but their defense and special teams are still great. But on offense, I've asked this question that still hasn't been answered yet, and we'll have to see if that happens at any point this season. If the Dallas Cowboys have a situation where their defense isn't playing well, will Dak Prescott have a game that's good enough to bail them out if that defense doesn't play well? And the answer to that is no. With San Francisco, to me, their defense hasn't gotten as much hoopla or had as much splash on the market as the Dallas Cowboys have, but when you look at San Francisco's opponents in comparison, they've played better teams. So I feel San Francisco's more complete with Dallas, and going back to Jacksonville, they're going to have trouble in that game. So even if it were a situation going back to Jacksonville where they lose this coming Sunday to Buffalo, I feel like they can beat the Colts, the Saints, and the Pittsburgh Steelers based on where they stand right now, and that would make them 3-2 over the course of their next 5 games. So that's how I feel about Jacksonville. The Atlanta Falcons, again, they started out 2-0, but I kind of knew that that was kind of a fluky deal, and I kind of felt like that was just more to do with their scheduling. So looking ahead to their schedule after this game here, coming up Sunday, they're home against the Houston Texans, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. The following week, they're home against the Washington Commanders, 1 p.m. Eastern on October 15th on CBS. On that following week after that, they are at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, October 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern. That's their Week 7 matchup. Then Week 8, they're home at the they're at the Tennessee Titans, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 29th. Following that, they'll be home against the Minnesota Vikings, November the 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Honestly, the Atlanta Falcons, looking at these games, Tampa Bay has been a good surprise, and I feel like they've gotten a stranglehold on that division right now. I feel like Tampa Bay is the team to beat right now as it stands, because they're 3-1. Atlanta sits at 2-2 with New Orleans, but if you were to have Atlanta and New Orleans go head to head, I would take New Orleans, and that's who I'm gonna take down the line possibly. We'll just have to see how things shake up because they play the Saints later in the year, their final game of the season, and then a few weeks prior to that. So we won't talk about the Falcons and Saints till later. But as of right now, I got the Buccaneers as their best team, Atlanta second, New Orleans third, and then Carolina, they're one of only 2 teams left that hasn't won a game yet. So that's something to look at as far as the Atlanta Falcons is, can they keep pace with Tampa and can they hold off the Saints? I just don't know if that's possible right now because the Saints, they're a mixed bag too. I just don't know if they're any good or not as far as consistency. So give me the way Houston's played, they've been fantastic. So give me Houston over Atlanta at this current time. I know it's at Atlanta, but Houston has definitely shown out so far, and they've shown they got a nice young core of players. And D'Amico Ryans, he's getting the best that he can out of that defense. He demands excellence, and he's a defensive guy. He played linebacker for the Texans a while back, so I feel like that attitude is rubbing off on that team. They're going to be a nice, feisty team. I'm not sure if they're a playoff caliber team, but they're feisty. I could see Houston beating Atlanta just off the way they've played so far through 4 games. Home against the Washington Commanders, I feel the same way about them as well. Even though their record is at 2-2, also they've played well 3 games out of 4. The Buffalo game withstanding, they've been a pretty good team as well, and they've played better to me than Atlanta. So give me them as well. And then, as I just mentioned, at Tampa Bay has played above their skis so far. Baker Mayfield has actually won them a couple of games. So I could see Atlanta going into a bit of a losing skid. At Tennessee, Tennessee definitely bounced back with the game that they had against Cincinnati, which we'll cover a little later on. They played very well, and Derrick Henry he showed that MVP caliber play. Back at it, and he played very well. That's the best I've seen of him so far this season. I'm home against the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, they've bounced back from their 0-3 start to get their win against Carolina. And I think down the line we'll have a better idea of what that game is going to be like between Atlanta and Minnesota. But based on the way things look right now, I would say Minnesota's the better team too. So, I mean, again, things happen in the NFL from week to week. Players get hurt, personnel changes, things happen. The trading deadline isn't until October 31st, so players could get traded in the next 4 weeks. We just don't know. But based on what I'm seeing with the Atlanta Falcons, they could lose all these 5 games. Their best shot might be a Houston or a Washington in the next couple weeks, but they just haven't really shown me anything to indicate that they're a team that's going to go very far. And I just don't have very much confidence that they're going to win this division. The division is muddled, as I said, but that still doesn't really mean anything to me because I look at right off the bat, I look at Tampa Bay and I look at the Saints as better teams as far as I'm concerned. So that's my opinion on that. Alrighty, moving to the next game that we're going to discuss here that occurred at 1 p.m. Eastern, October 1st. The Buffalo Bills were at home. They defeated the Miami Dolphins in handy fashion. 48-20 was the final score. So Miami coming off of that 50-point blowout of the Denver Broncos. They were on the receiving end of their own blowout, unfortunately. Josh Allen went ham in this game here, 21 of 25 for 320 yards and 4 touchdowns. He definitely led the way in throwing the football. Tua Tagovailoa was 25 of 35 for Miami, 282 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So definitely a far cry from how they played against the Denver Broncos. I think a lot of that had to do with Denver's defense and the fact that they were at home. Because playing at Buffalo has always been a tough place to play for Miami. I think this was their 8th straight loss at Buffalo. So that dates back to like 2016. So that's tough news right there. That's tough sledding for this team. But Miami is still a fantastic team. By no means are they a slouch by any means. This is the way it's going to be in the AFC East as far as these two teams. Patriots and Jets, I don't see them being on this plane of these two teams at all. The Bills, by virtue of winning this game head to head, lead the division at 3-1. Miami unfortunately falls to 3-1. They were the last unbeaten team in the AFC. So that's how that stands. Buffalo is going to lead the division. Miami is second. And the rest of the division, New England and New York, they're 1-3, with New England being third by virtue of being the Jets head to head last week. So that division, like I said, it's Miami. I did say it was Miami's to lose, but I might have to retract that statement because of the fact that the Bills, to me, is because we saw the ugly side of what Josh Allen's game can be when he gets careless with the football. But I feel like they've shored things up since that game. Miami, again, by no means is a bad football team, but Buffalo is nothing to sleep on. So these two are going to slug it out down the stretch for sure. Looking at the rushing total for this team here, for the Buffalo Bills, Latavius Murray, he had 4 carries for 32 yards, but didn't find the end zone. That went to James Cook, who had 12 carries for 29 yards and 1 touchdown. Damian Harris had 6 carries for another 29 yards. Josh Allen carried the ball 4 times for 17 yards and had another touchdown. So he had 5 total touchdowns between running and passing. On the Miami side, Devin Achane, he had a fantastic game to go along with what he did last week. He had 8 carries for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a 55-yard run as part of that total. So he toted the rock very, very well, and he has a total of 5 touchdowns in his 2 games combined this past week and the previous week against Denver. Tariq Hill carried the ball 1 time for 14 yards on an end around, and Braxton Berrios also carried the ball 1 time for 11 yards as well. They had 142 yards on the ground, but much of that went to Devin Achane. And Raheem Mostert, he had a fantastic game last week, but didn't do much this week at all. He had 7 carries for 9 yards. Looking at the receiving statistics here for Buffalo, Stephon Diggs, he definitely ate. He ate and ate and ate. 6 catches for 120 yards, 3 touchdowns, including a 55-yarder in the third quarter to really get things popping for this team. They just were handling business from the jump. They were up 31-14 at the half, and it was never ever close. Gabe Davis also contributed with 3 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. And running back James Cook had 1 catch for 48 yards. He had a 48-yard catch on the only catch he was targeted for. So between on the ground and in the air, he had 77 yards in total. For the Miami side, Tyreek Hill had 3 catches for 58 yards, but didn't find the end zone. Jalen Waddle, who was back from concussion after missing the game against Denver last week, had 4 catches for 46 yards, but he also didn't find the end zone either. Braxton Berrios did find the end zone with 6 catches for 43 yards, and tight end Durham Smythe contributed as well with 4 catches for 41 yards. This was just a good old fashioned whooping. I'm definitely just impressed with the Bills and what they're able to do. They just handle business from start to finish, and they showed that we're in this mix for real. That's why you're going to talk about us. I feel like with the way Cincinnati is struggling, we'll talk about them later as well and their results against Tennessee. With Cincinnati struggling, I feel like this is going to affect the top of how the AFC is going to look. As far as I'm concerned, Kansas City, Buffalo, Miami are the teams that I look at in the AFC off the rip, and then Baltimore would probably be fourth. As far as an AFC representative, again, then we're gonna have to see how that shakes out and see how those 4 teams play because none of them have truly been consistent so far. But as far as the top teams in the AFC, right off the rip, I think of Kansas City, Buffalo, Miami, and then Baltimore right after that. We'll talk about them as well. Even though Baltimore hasn't been very healthy, they've played great football, and that's what matters is getting the win. So Buffalo, a good old butt cutting, as they call it. Looking at their schedule, we talked about this game just a bit ago, but they're going to be against the Jacksonville Jaguars in England this coming Sunday. Again, that's 9:30 p.m. Eastern on the NFL Network, October 8th. The following week, they're home against the New York Giants against them October 15th for Sunday Night Football, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC. The following week, they're at the New England Patriots, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 22nd on CBS. Then they have a Thursday night football game home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, October 26th. Then they have a game at the Cincinnati Bengals, 8:20 p.m. Eastern for Sunday Night Football, November the 5th. Buffalo, if they just keep on rolling like this here, I think the toughest game that they may see could be Cincinnati. We'll have to see if Burrow. I mentioned this in the previous broadcast. His calf issue is definitely rearing its ugly head. He has not been the Joe Burrow we've been accustomed to. And Cincinnati has one more game before they have their bye week the following week in week 6. We'll have to see if they sit him down beyond that or if they sit him down this coming week because he just hasn't been the Joe Burrow that we know and love. If they can get him healthy for that Buffalo game November 5th, that'll be very helpful, but I see Buffalo winning that game. Outside of a catastrophic injury to a key player, I don't see Buffalo losing. I don't. Because even after that, they're home against the Denver Broncos for Monday Night Football on November 13th. That's gonna be awful. Denver's gonna get smoked. I know those Ron Miller's former team, but that's really the only sentiment that'll be there for that. But we'll talk about that at a later time. I can see Buffalo being a 5-0 football team and winning all those games, honestly. I really could. As far as the Miami Dolphins, let's take a look at their next 5 games and see what they got going on here. They're home against the New York Giants at 1 p.m. Eastern on October 8th. That's definitely going to be a great cure-all for this blowout, and I could see them winning that game handily. They're home again against the Carolina Panthers, October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They're at the Philadelphia Eagles, October, excuse me, October 22nd, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC for Sunday Night Football. They're home against the New England Patriots, October 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern. And then the following week, November the 5th, they have an international game against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's going to take place in Germany at Frankfurt Stadium on November the 5th. That's actually, again, going to be at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on the NFL Network. So again, the Dolphins, as far as I'm concerned here, as I said just a bit ago, they're going to take care of business against the Giants. The Giants are just not a good football team, as you saw last night. If you saw the game against Seattle, they're not a good football team, and I expect Miami to handle that business, especially at home. We saw what they're capable at home in their opener against Denver. They handle business at home. That's their field. They'll have another home game against another team that hasn't even won a game yet in the Carolina Panthers. So that's another win. That'll put them at 5-1 if they can win those. Things happen from week to week, but I just don't see the Giants and Panthers giving them problems. At Philadelphia, I've talked about this game before, and as we get closer to it, that game is still a few weeks away, give or take. As we get closer to that game, that's gonna be a huge one at Philadelphia. If they can win that football game, that has like a slight Super Bowl preview. I don't really believe in those because those never really pan out all the time. Um, but yeah, that's going to be a fantastic game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Home against the New England Patriots. That's another divisional matchup here. They already managed to defeat them on the road way back in week 2, 24-17. So the New England Patriots, again, that game, Mac Jones, he got demolished by that defense against Dallas. And again, with Miami being at home, I could see them winning that game as well. The international game against Kansas City is interesting because neither team is going to have home field advantage. And I feel like a November game at Arrowhead Stadium, if that were a situation where Miami would have had to go there, that would have had some influence on this game for sure. But we'll talk more about that game as we get closer to it. Of these next 5 games, Philly and KC are the only ones that scream out like any kind of difficulty. And over the next 5 games, I could see them being at worst 3-2. The Miami Dolphins at worst 3-2. So we'll have to see how things shake up. But like I said, in order for them to keep pace with Buffalo, they're going to have to handle biz just like Buffalo is. And that's the way it's going to have to be here. The next game we're going to talk about here is the Chicago Bears hosting the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos actually escaping with the win, 31-28 to get their first win on the season, improving to 1-3. And the Chicago Bears, they are the only other team winless with the Carolina Panthers at 0-4, unfortunately. The Chicago Bears led this game at one point 28-7 in the third quarter. Something to note here, and they just couldn't hang on. Just couldn't hang on. Russell Wilson had a pretty fantastic day. He had 21 of 28 for 223 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Justin Fields had a stat sheet day, but they didn't get the victory. 28 of 35 for 335 yards, 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. As far as rushing the football, Fields also had 4 carries for 25 yards as well. As far as this game goes, again, I thought this was an 0-4 for Denver and not for Chicago because the way this game looked the first half and part of the third quarter, they just did not play well. Chicago scored all 21 of their first half points in the second half, so Denver actually led this 7-0 after one. And it was Denver squeaked by because there were some coaching blunders made in the fourth quarter by Chicago that just didn't really make any sense. There was a point in the game where if they had taken the field goal instead of going for it, that would have been an additional 3 points, and that would have gave them 31 instead of the 28 that they were stuck with. That could have been an overtime game, and they possibly could have gotten that win depending on the coin flip and who did what. So I just thought this was a coaching blunder on Chicago's part, and it's just a mess in Chicago. Denver, they still got some things to figure out, but it's always nice to get in the win column. That's really all it comes down to. As far as rushing the football for Chicago, Khalil Herbert had a pretty solid day. 18 carries for 103 yards. And again, Justin Fields added to that with 4 carries for 25 yards. They had a total of 171 yards on the ground rushing the football. For Denver, Jaleel McLaughlin had 7 carries for 72 yards. Russell Wilson did carry the ball 4 times for 13 yards. A lot of that was when the pocket broke down. He just scrambled to get out of bounds. There was never really any situations where it was a run play designed for him. It was just more to get out of the pocket and avoid taking a sack. So the Broncos conversely had 97 carries on the ground. Javonte Williams had 2 carries for no yards at all. I think he went out early in the game with a knee injury, and he's being evaluated on a day-to-day basis, so he didn't really do much for them either. As far as receiving the football, DJ Moore led things for Chicago and as a whole for the game with 8 catches for 131 yards and a touchdown in the second quarter. Tight end Cole Kmet for Chicago had 7 catches for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns, and a pretty solid day for him as well. Darnell Mooney also contributed with 4 catches for 51 yards. On Denver side, Jerry Jeudy had 3 catches for 52 yards. He did not find the end zone. Marvin Mims had 2 catches for 48 yards and a pretty solid day. And Jaleel McLaughlin also added added a touchdown on the receiving from Russell Wilson. He had 3 catches for 32 yards. Cortland Sutton also found the end zone as well with 3 catches for 27 yards. So the Denver Broncos, to me, the offense hasn't been the problem. The offense is actually playing a lot better than they did last season. So I don't feel as though the offense is an issue whatsoever. The defense is what's causing this issue because that 21 points in the second half, that was just a lot of awful coverage and a lot of miscommunication. That's how Cole Kmet was able to get those 2 touchdowns where they just didn't communicate great in the end zone at all. And they were just bailed out by just blunders in the second half, as far as I'm concerned. So the Denver Broncos, like I said, it's nice to get in the win column. They're 1-3 at the bottom of the division by virtue of losing to the Las Vegas Raiders. They're also 1-3. Kansas City, like I said, they lead it at 3-1. Los Angeles is 2-2. The Los Angeles Chargers. The NFC North, as far as Chicago goes, they're now 0-4 with everybody else having a win in their division. Detroit leads things at 3-1. The Green Bay Packers are 2-2, and the Minnesota Vikings are 1-3 by virtue of their victory over Carolina. Chicago, it's just kind of hard to say where you start as far as fixing this team. Because with bringing in a new coach and a new GM, you would think that does help a bit, but Justin Fields wasn't the guy that they drafted, this coach and GM. This was drafted during the Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace era when they were the coach and GM for this team. So that's who had them for that first year in 2021. This isn't their guy. So if you're the Chicago Bears, something to also note, if the Chicago Bears were to earn the number 1 pick, they would have the first 2 picks in the 2024 NFL draft, which is virtually unheard of. Um, that would be insane if they did have that because you could get yourself a quarterback and also get yourself possibly a lineman, another running back, something. You can utilize those picks to get you players. They're not going to trade that pick away this year, as they did to Carolina for 2023 draft. I don't see them doing that. But going back to the Denver Broncos here, it was definitely nice for them to get the win. And looking ahead to their next 5 games here, they're home against the New York Giants on Sunday, October 8th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. I'll be in the house for that. The following week, they have a Thursday night game they have to turn around for actually 4 days later, and they're at the Kansas City Chiefs, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Amazon Prime, October 12th. 10 days later, they get the Green Bay Packers off of a bye, actually, October 22nd, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. The Green Bay will be coming off the bye. The following week, they're home for the Kansas City Chiefs again for a second time in 3 weeks, October 29th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they have their bye week, week 9. They have their bye week. Then they're back week 10 at the Buffalo Bills, November 13th, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on ABC for Monday Night Football. We doggy. If you're the Denver Broncos, that's tough. All those games are tough. Even the Green Bay game, squeezed in between those two Chiefs games, is going to be tough. And with the Jets on Sunday, we'll talk about Zach Wilson and his Sunday night result against the Kansas City Chiefs and how he played. He was actually the better quarterback than Patrick Mahomes, even though the Chiefs got the victory. He actually statistically played very well. It's just that late fumble that he had definitely caused their issue and gave the Chiefs the new life earlier in the game. So if the Broncos slip up at all on defense, I could see them losing. I'm gonna say they win against the Jets because they're at home, but this is not really a gimme by any means. The Jets actually showed me a little something with Zach Wilson specifically playing the way he did. The Chiefs is a loss. Home against the Green Bay Packers, same thing. If they're not careful, I could see the Green Bay Packers coming into Denver and handling business. I could see them taking that game. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, they just don't win at Arrowhead. They haven't won since Peyton Manning was there. So that's a loss too. And then at Buffalo, even though they have a bye week after the Kansas City game and then Buffalo at Buffalo, I still see that as a loss because Buffalo, they're one of the top teams easily in the AFC, barring major injury and barring catastrophic injury to someone or losing someone important on that team. So the Broncos could be at best 1-4 over these 5 games. I genuinely hope for them not to be. I hope for them obviously to have a better luck, but they don't beat Kansas City. They haven't beaten them since Mahomes was there. And that Jets game, it could be tricky. I got them winning that game, but the games after that, it just doesn't look good. Looking at the Bears' schedule for their next games here coming up here, where they'll get their first win is a very, very tricky thing. They have the Thursday night football game coming up here on October 5th, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Amazon Prime against the Washington Commanders. They'll be visiting them. And as far as I'm concerned, the Washington Commanders, they're a good team, even though they're 2-2, because they've played well in 3 or 4 games. Like I said, that Buffalo loss was a blowout, but they won their first 2 games and they fought hard against Philly this past weekend, taking them to overtime. So at Washington, I'm gonna say Washington wins that football game against the Bears, honestly. I think it's a situation where just as a whole, Washington is a better team, and that defensive front is gonna give Justin Fields problems. He's probably gonna have more rushing yards than he did against the Broncos because of the fact that he's gonna be have to out of the pocket more often. He's gonna have to move more. So I'm gonna take Washington to win that game. 10 days later, on October 15th, the Chicago Bears will be home against the Minnesota Vikings, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They're also home the following week against the Las Vegas Raiders, 1 p.m. Eastern on October 22nd on Fox as well. Then they have a Sunday night football game at the Los Angeles Chargers, October 29th, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC. Then they also travel to the New Orleans Saints, October 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS as well. It is tough to say where they're going to get their first win. But my prediction, again, I got them losing to Washington. If they do get that win, that'll be a nice win for them, considering it'll be on the road. But in all honesty, I could see them either getting their first win against the Raiders, maybe Minnesota, because they're at home. But I don't know if that'll be a factor because Minnesota finally looked pretty good against Carolina. So yeah, it's going to be possibly 1-4 over the course of their next 5 games as well. They're kind of in the same position as Denver. I called that a toilet bowl game, and it was just the best of the worst playing each other, plain and simple. And Denver got the better of them. So Chicago, they're probably going to have tough sledding over the course of the next 5 games, just like Denver did as well. But we'll just have to see how things shake up and see if they can get that together. They're probably playing for next year at this point, the Chicago Bears, like I said, because if they finish with the worst record in the league, by virtue of previous transactions and trades, they would have the top 2 picks in the 2024 NFL draft. So maybe they could get 2 franchise players, maybe not. We'll just have to see what they do with that. The next game we're going to talk about here and discuss is the Baltimore Ravens traveling to the Cleveland Browns. They won that game handily, 28-3. The Cleveland Browns didn't have Deshaun Watson available for this game, and that was kind of what doomed the Cleveland Browns. They used the rookie Dorian Thompson Robinson. He was 19 of 36 for Cleveland with 121 yards, but he threw three interceptions, and that definitely spelled him. He's a rookie out of UCLA, and he was just deemed to be the backup this year for Deshaun Watson. Jacoby Brissett is with the Commanders now as their backup, so they brought him in as the backup to spell them, and he had a rough day in place of Deshaun Watson. For Baltimore, Lamar Jackson was 15 of 19 for 186 yards and two touchdowns. And he also scrambled nine carries for 27 yards for two touchdowns as well. So he had a total of four touchdowns, two through the air and two on the ground. So a four touchdown day for him, doing what he usually does. And that's what makes him an MVP candidate every year is that versatility he possesses. Gus Edwards running the football for Baltimore had 15 carries for 48 yards, but didn't find the end zone. And Justice Hill, running back, he had three carries for 33 yards as well. Melvin Gordon III also had another three carries for 21 yards. They had 131 yards on the ground as a team, to Cleveland's 93 on the ground as a team. Pierre Strong led them with five carries for 46 yards. And Jerome Ford, he had another nine carries for 26 yards as well. So it was just a rough day as a whole for them. They just didn't find the end zone at all, and it was just brutal for the rookie. Deshaun Watson, I'm not sure what kind of difference he would have made, but just Baltimore was just definitely clicking. They were firing on all cylinders. As far as the receiving statistics here, Baltimore tight end Mark Andrews had five catches for 80 yards and two touchdowns. He was targeted five times and caught them all. Rookie Zay Flowers, the wide receiver out of Boston College, had three catches for 56 yards. And Melvin Gordon actually contributed with a 23-yard reception of his own in the second quarter. For Cleveland, tight end David Njoku, he had six catches for 46 yards, but didn't find the end zone. Running back Jerome Ford had five catches for 19 yards, and wide receiver Elijah Moore contributed with two catches for 20 yards. Again, only 121 yards thrown on the ground by the quarterback here, Thompson Robinson, and just a rough debut for him overall. Cleveland, they started out very promising here at 2-0, and they've dropped their last couple of games, and I just feel like a lot of that has to do with injury. Actually, as they started out 1-0, they lost week two against Pittsburgh with that Nick Chubb unfortunate injury, and then they got blown out last week. So, I'm sorry, they got blown out this week, and they did the blowing out last week. So sorry about that. Cleveland for me, as I said, Baltimore is one of the top teams in all of the AFC, and they're going to run this division. With Cleveland's struggles and with Pittsburgh's struggles on offense, and with Cincinnati's struggles with Joe Burrow, this does belong to Baltimore, plain and simple, because right off the bat, we're seeing adversity with these other teams. And even with Baltimore having the injuries that they have to important guys, such as like losing their running back for the season, J.K. Dobbins, right off the bat, and not having your left tackle Ronnie Stanley the last couple of games, they've still found a way to get it done, especially in their division. That's the key. Baltimore is 2-0 on the road. Their only loss came at home to Indianapolis last week. So, like I said, Baltimore, this is their division to lose, and for me, it's just a matter of keeping pace in the conference more so than the division. You don't want to lose divisional games, but if they keep pace in the conference, I think they'll be fine. They're 2-0 in the division already, and both of them were on the road, so that's key. This will be their third divisional matchup on the road coming up here on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. We'll talk about them as well. Then they have an international matchup October 15th, 9:30 a.m. Eastern on the NFL Network. That'll be against the Tennessee Titans at Tottenham Stadium. October 15th. That should be pretty exciting. Those games are usually pretty fun if you like getting up that early to watch, but it's a pretty fun environment. They really love those games internationally here. So you'll see all different kinds of jerseys, even though it's a Baltimore game and Tennessee game. So they'll be back home the following week on October 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern against the Detroit Lions on Fox. They're at Arizona Cardinals October 29th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they'll be home against the Seattle Seahawks October 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS as well. So the Baltimore Ravens, I got them winning that game at Pittsburgh. We'll talk about Pittsburgh in a bit. I had a lot higher hopes for Pittsburgh at the beginning of the season. I had them being a roughly 4-0 team at this point, and that's just not the case. They've had a lot of issues, and we'll have to see if Kenny Pickett is available for that game coming up on Sunday as well. Pittsburgh, I'm going to say Baltimore wins that game to improve to 3-0 in their division, 5-1 overall. I'm sorry, 4-1 overall. And Pittsburgh, they got a lot of questions they got to answer about themselves and who they really think they are as a team. On the international matchup between the Tennessee Titans, we'll have to see how that defense responds to how Derrick Henry is running the football, because he can definitely be a Swiss Army knife on his own and be very dangerous for that team. So Baltimore and Tennessee is kind of a pick 'em because of the international aspect. Detroit, that's going to be a tough game as well, but I could see Detroit coming in there and taking that game, even though it's in Baltimore. At Arizona, I see Baltimore winning that football game. Arizona, they're a very feisty team that has a lot of fight, but I just don't know if they'll have what it takes to beat Baltimore. They let the Giants come in there and beat them, so if that's the case, then I can see Baltimore taking this game. Baltimore versus Seattle, that's going to be a really good game as well because Seattle, they've proven that they can knock folks out too, and that's going to be kind of a pick 'em for me at this current time right now. So based on their next 5 games here, Baltimore could be, to me, at worst 3-2. They could be 4-1, but they could also be 2-3 actually at worst. So these again, I got them winning the Pittsburgh game, but Detroit and Seattle are going to be tough. And that international game against Tennessee, I don't know how that matchup is going to shake out. So that's going to be an exciting set of games for Baltimore. This will really prove if they can keep pace with the teams in the conference and see where they stand. Because if you're any of the top 4 teams, you'll have a home playoff game, and if you're the 1 seed, obviously you don't have a wild card game at all. You just head straight to the divisional round and await your opponent. But if they can be 2, 3, 4, and get themselves a home playoff game to start, that'll be great. Ideally, you want to be number 1 in the conference, but with Baltimore, we'll just have to see if they can keep pace. They're missing some key guys, and I feel like that'll affect them down the road. As far as the rest of the schedule goes for Cleveland, they're missing key guys as well. And when Deshaun Watson doesn't play right off the bat, that's going to hurt you. So with Cleveland, we'll just have to see what they do and see if they can keep pace in the division. But their next game is going to be October 15th. They have a bye week coming up this weekend, so they don't play week 5. The San Francisco 49ers sounds like a win for the Niners and a loss for the Browns for sure, and that would put them at 2-3. They're at Indianapolis and at Seattle the next couple of weeks, 1 p.m. Eastern on October 22nd for the Colts game on CBS, and then at Seattle, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox, October 29th. So they have to travel to the West Coast for that game. They're home for the Arizona Cardinals November 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at the Baltimore Ravens, 1 p.m. Eastern on November 12th on Fox. So like I said, after their bye week, week 5, they're definitely going to lose to the 49ers. The Colts and Seahawks, they'll lose the Seahawks game as well because of the travel aspect and the personnel that they don't have. At Indianapolis, that's kind of a pick 'em, but Indianapolis feels like the better team at the moment. And with the Cardinals game, I wouldn't be shocked if they lost that game because the Cardinals have been very feisty and they've kept pace with everyone they've played. I know it looks like a blowout to the Niners, but they definitely kept pace the first 3 quarters of that game. So, and then finally, Cleveland at Baltimore. I can see them losing that game again too. I could definitely see them losing that game. So at best, Cleveland might be 1-4 over these 5 games. It's looking kinda dicey for them. We'll have to see if they can keep pace here and see what they can do as well, but they had a nice start, but things are getting real for them now, so on to the next game we're gonna talk about here. It was a beatdown of all beatdowns here. The Tennessee Titans defeated the Cincinnati Bengals 27-3 and actually led the game 24-3 at the half, so they just knocked an extra field goal, and it was just never close. Joe Burrow, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, he's struggling. He was 20 of 30 for 165 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Ryan Tannehill was 18 of 25 for 240 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He actually had a pretty solid day despite the interception. And Joe Burrow, I mean, he was able to get out there and play, but it just didn't really make much of a difference. They only had 72 yards on the ground with Joe Mixon rushing for 14 carries and 67 yards, but didn't find the end zone. As far as again, Tennessee on the rushing side of things for them, they had a total of 173 yards on the ground, so they definitely dominated running the football. Derrick Henry, 22 carries for 122 yards and 1 touchdown. Tajay Spears, the backup, had 5 carries of his own for another 40 yards. So Cincinnati is in trouble. I had higher hopes for Cincinnati, but even with Cleveland, as I just mentioned a bit ago, even with their struggles, I feel like if Joe Burrow doesn't get right, this team is not going to go anywhere. I don't even know if they'll make the playoffs. T. Higgins, he's going to miss time as well, possibly with he suffered a fractured rib in that game. He's not sure that it'll keep him out for an extended period of time, and he actually didn't even rule out the possibility of playing against Arizona on this if he can tolerate the pain and the soreness that comes along with that. So that's kind of crazy to me. Like I said, football players they play this game with ailments every week, and it doesn't matter when it is, something's gonna happen. And they play this game and they play it because they love it. They don't complain about it and they just want to be out there as best as they can, even if it's to their own detriment sometimes. So kudos to him for wanting to be out there. He was held to 2 catches for 19 yards, and I think a lot of that had to do with the ribs, so we'll have to see if he can do anything for Cincinnati, but overall on offense and on defense, it was just a rough day for Cincinnati. As far as receiving the football for Tennessee, DeAndre Hopkins had 4 catches for 63 yards, including a 38-yard catch. He was targeted 6 times. He has not found the end zone yet for Tennessee. We're still awaiting a first touchdown from him this year, but he has not found the end zone for this team. We'll have to see when that does occur for them. Who did find the end zone was Nick Westbrook-Ikhine with 5 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown in the third quarter. And tight end Chigoziem Okonkwo contributed with 3 catches for 29 yards. On the flip side for Cincinnati, Jamar Chase, wide receiver, he had 7 catches for 73 yards. Tyler Boyd had 4 catches for 26 yards. As far as his wide receivers, he was able to target them 20 times, and he was able to get 13 catches out of it. Joe Burrow, that is, but they just didn't find the end zone. Didn't find the end zone all day. And to me, Cincinnati, like I said, they're in trouble. They're already at the bottom of the AFC North at 1-3. Baltimore leads at 3-1 with Pittsburgh and Cleveland at 2-2. And Joe Burrow, he's the guy that runs the ship for this team as far as that offense goes. The defense to me is fair for Cincinnati, but if that offense isn't doing anything, it's not going to matter very much. So that's a tough deal with him being injured. That's not going to help things at all. I'm looking ahead to their schedule as far as the Tennessee Titans here. Coming up this Sunday, they'll be at the Indianapolis Colts October 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. As I mentioned, they have an international game October 15th against the Baltimore Ravens. That's 9:30 a.m. on the NFL Network. Then they hit their bye week, week 7. The following week, week 8, they'll be back against the home against the Atlanta Falcons October 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Then they have a quick turnaround with a Thursday night game at the Pittsburgh Steelers, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, November 2nd. Then 10 days later, they're at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 1 p.m. Eastern, on November 12th on CBS. The Tennessee Titans have been very inconsistent. The first game of the season, the Saints squeaked by with a 1-point victory. Then they turned around and beat the Los Angeles Chargers, week 2 in a late game. Week 3, they get obliterated 27-3 by the Cleveland Browns at Cleveland. Then they turn around and deliver their own 27-3 beatdown against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Tennessee Titans, they're a pick'em team right now. They're not terrible, but they're not great. It's nice to see Derrick Henry get back to form with his 100-yard game that he had, but he just hasn't been much of a factor as far as this team all season. At the Indianapolis Colts is going to be a slugfest because the entire division, the AFC South is 2-2. Indianapolis, Houston, Jacksonville, and Tennessee are all 2-2. So, like I said, nobody stands out, and nobody is the worst. So, this will kind of shake things out as far as the who's going to lead the division and who's going to be at the bottom of the division regarding the Titans. So, I'm going to say the Titans win this game close at Indianapolis. I'll make I'll make another prediction here this Thursday and kind of let you know how I feel about these games as we skim through them again. But I'm going to say that they win at Indianapolis. The Baltimore game, that's an international matchup before they head into their bye week, and there's no real home field in that one. But as I stated earlier, I'm going to go with Baltimore to win that football game. After their bye week, they're home against Atlanta. I'm going to take Tennessee to definitely win that one because Atlanta, they really haven't shown me much either. At Pittsburgh, that following Thursday is going to be a quick turnaround 4 days later is always tough on the body. And with them being at home, the Pittsburgh Steelers could have a shot, but they have their own question marks as well. So I'll have a better idea closer to that time period as to who I'm actually going to take. and at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 10 days later, November 12th on CBS, 1 p.m. Eastern. That feels like it could go either way too, because Tampa Bay at 3-1, they've definitely been a surprise to me. So looking at Tennessee as far as their next 5 games, in all honesty, they could be 2-3, 3-2. We'll just have to kind of see how they shake up because again, at 2-2, they haven't shown me much. They're not terrible, but they're not great. So it's definitely a toss up as far as what that team is going to do. And on the flip side here, with the Cincinnati Bengals, as far as what they're going to do with their schedule, it's going to be rough. They're at the Arizona Cardinals this coming Sunday, October 8th, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox. And with the way Arizona is playing, they could beat the Cincinnati Bengals. They could make them vulnerable right now. The Cincinnati Bengals are then home against the Seattle Seahawks, October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern. And that team made life hell. The Seattle Seahawks did. They made life hell on the Giants as Daniel Jones. So if they can do that same thing to Burrow, that's going to be a rough day. So Cincinnati might want to be careful at Arizona and home against Seattle. Those could be losses. Those look like they could be losses. They'll have a bye week, week 7, and how they come out of that is gonna really determine how I feel at the San Francisco 49ers, October 29th. Because like I said, if Joe Burrow is not healthy and he isn't going the way he should be, this team could be not even a playoff team this year. So at San Francisco, that's gonna be tough, and then things don't get any easier at home against the Buffalo Bills for Sunday Night Football, November 5th, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC. Even a week later, home against the Houston Texans isn't a gimme because Houston has played some fantastic football to be a 2-2 football team. So nothing's a gimme with the Cincinnati Bengals. We're really gonna have to see because at 1-3 right now, a lot of that has to do with Joe Burrow not being the guy that he normally is on the football field. Um, if this team doesn't do as good as 3-2, 4-1 in the next 5 games, they could be out of it. They could be out of it, in my opinion, because Joe Burrow, I'm going to keep stressing that Joe Burrow is your guy. That's why they're paying him, as far as I'm concerned. So, prayers up for the Cincinnati Bengals, but this is a bad thing. This is really bad because 1-3 is not how you envision this team starting if you're a prognosticator and you looked at this thing with Joe Burrow being healthy. So, let's talk about another football game here that was actually pretty exciting here. The first half and the second half were a tale of two halves, actually. The Rams get the overtime victory over the Indianapolis Colts, 29-23, to improve to 2-2 as the Colts fall to 2-2, unfortunately. The Colts, interestingly enough, are 2-0 on the road, but 0-2 at home, which is very interesting. The Rams, with the passing statistics here, Matthew Stafford was 27 of 40 for 319 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, with that touchdown coming in overtime to Puka Nakua, who got that game winner. Anthony Richardson returned from injury to come back. He was 11 of 25 for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. To also go with 10 carries on the ground for 56 yards and a touchdown as well. So he had 3 touchdowns in total, 2 through the air, and 1 on the ground. He was unfortunately under 50% completion rate, so he didn't throw the ball as well as he could have. As far as rushing the football here, Los Angeles Rams, Kyron Williams had 25 carries for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Ronnie Rivers contributed to that as well with 9 carries and 47 yards. They had 164 yards on the ground as a team, and the Colts had 133 yards on the ground as a team. Zach Moss had 18 carries for 70 yards. And as I stated earlier, Anthony Richardson, 10 carries for 56 yards and that touchdown. So Anthony Richardson, he just needs more seasoning. He's definitely shown he can be a dynamic, fantastic player on the field. He just needs more seasoning as far as his reads and as far as getting out there and getting the repetitions that he needs. He's going to be fantastic. I think the Colts made a good pick with him. We'll just have to see over the course of the next few years if they can get that line right, but they definitely made the right choice in bringing him in. As far as the receiving statistics here for the Los Angeles Rams, Puka Nakua led all receivers with 9 catches for 163 yards and that overtime touchdown, the 32-yarder. Tight end Tyler Higbee had 5 catches for 64 yards, and running back Kyron Williams also had 3 catches for 24 yards as well to go along with what he did on the ground. That touchdown to Nakua was fantastic. Puka Nakua, He's a beast. They're going to have a good problem with the Los Angeles Rams when Cooper Kupp returns off of IR. He's eligible to return off IR for this Week 5 matchup because you have to miss a minimum of 4 games. So depending on his health and with the contributions they've gotten from Puka Nacua and also Tutu Atwell, also he had 5 catches for 24 yards. They're going to have a solid receiving core. And then with the running core, Kyron Williams, he's pretty nice. I like his game. So they're going to have a nice young offense to go along with Matthew Stafford, who's an old veteran, but they got great pieces in place for the Los Angeles Rams. And we'll just have to see how they all fit with Cooper Kupp coming back. As far as the Indianapolis Colts, as I just mentioned a bit, talking about with the Tennessee Titans as well, they're 2-2 in a division where everybody is 2-2. So I just don't know what they're going to be because they showed promise early in the season, and they've also showed a lot of novice as well on the offensive side of the ball. Drew Ogletree did have 3 catches for 48 yards and a touchdown, and Mo Alley Cox, the other tight end, had 1 catch for 35 yards and a touchdown as well. So not much really going on with the receiving core. Michael Pittman only had 1 catch for receiving for 15 yards, and he was targeted 5 times. And so, as far as the receiving core for Indianapolis, they didn't really contribute as much as they could have. It was just kind of a situation where he was willing to do more with his legs, and he did show that a lot. The Los Angeles Rams here at 2-2, looking ahead to their next 5 games on the schedule. They're home against the Philadelphia Eagles October 8th at 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then the following week, they're home against the Arizona Cardinals October 15th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox as well. Following that up here, they're home again October 22nd against the Pittsburgh Steelers at 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then their next 2 games, they are on the road at Dallas, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 29th, and at Green Bay, 1 p.m. Eastern, November the 5th. So, yeah, the Los Angeles Rams have played 3 of their first 4 games at home, or I'm sorry, on the road with their home game against the Niners in week 2, losing 30-23. So it's going to be nice to get 3 straight home games. That doesn't happen typically very often. And with Arizona and Pittsburgh, to me, those sound like those could be wins, honestly, because of that aspect. They'll be comfortable over the course of the middle of October here. The Philadelphia Eagles, as I said, they're one of the top 3 teams in the NFC, and in all honesty, I can see that being a loss for the Rams. And then the Dallas game at Dallas, that's a loss just because that defense is very overwhelming. So for the next 5 games, the Rams, they can be a 4-1 team possibly if they can steal one of those games I mentioned, but I can see them being 3-2. With the Indianapolis Colts, however, this is where things kind of get tricky for them because, like I said, they're in a division where they're 2-2, and things don't really show. It doesn't really show yet who's the best team in that division. They're home against the Tennessee Titans, which is another divisional matchup, October 8th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at Jacksonville, October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern. This sounds redundant, but they could win or lose those games, either one of those games. I could see them losing to Tennessee and beating Jacksonville because that's just how wacky that division is. Again, I could see them losing to Tennessee and beating Jacksonville with those games. Home against the Cleveland Browns, October 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll have to see how healthy they are, especially with Deshaun Watson, to see if he's back or not. But that game is a pick-em as far as I'm concerned. And then home against the Saints, October 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, also feels like a pick-em as well, just because the Saints have been very inconsistent also. So, and the following week, they're at the Carolina Panthers, 4:05 p.m. Eastern, November 5th on CBS. The Colts at Panthers. That's going to be an interesting matchup because Bryce Young, the rookie quarterback, he's kind of had his own struggles as well based on the team that he has around him in Carolina. So that's going to be a showcase of who's going to really be the future with that Colts-Panthers game coming up November 5th. For the Colts, I could see them being 2-3, 1-4 over the course of their next 5 games as well. If they could be 3-2, that would be solid, and that would keep them in pace with everybody else because, like I said, the AFC South, everybody is 2-2 right now. Nobody's really showing that they're going to dominate that division yet. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Colts, they're not the best, but they're not weak by any means. They just have a lot of young pieces, and we'll just have to see how they shake up as far as what they are down the road. Moving on to an NFC South matchup that occurred, the Buccaneers defeated the Saints in New Orleans by a final score of 26-9. Baker Mayfield was 25 of 32 with 246 yards, three touchdowns to one interception. Derek Carr for New Orleans was 23 of 37 for 127 yards, no touchdowns, and no interceptions as well. Taysom Hill came in for a pass play and threw one completion for 13 yards as well. Um, this game, to me, Derek Carr showed his toughness, much like Baker Mayfield has been prone to do, but I just don't know if he was healthy enough to play. 127 yards over the course of that game is roughly only about 31, 32 yards a quarter. That's terrible if you're trying to get that game won. They did get Alvin Kamara going with 11 carries for 51 yards running the football. He also had 13 catches for 33 yards as well. Alvin Kamara is very versatile out of the backfield, so he can run the football and catch the ball very well. But it just didn't lead to any scores for this team. They scored all field goals in this game. As far as running the football for Tampa, Rashad White had 15 carries for 56 yards, but didn't find the end zone. And Baker Mayfield added another 8 carries for 31 yards as well. Receiving the football, Chris Godwin he had a pretty solid game. He had a nice stat line with 8 catches for 114 yards. But Devin Tompkins found the end zone with 4 catches for 45 yards and a touchdown, as I mentioned here. Mike Evans had 3 catches for 40 yards, but he had to leave the game in the third quarter with a hamstring issue, so he didn't really perform as he typically has been these previous games. But with Chris Godwin being there, that's definitely going to help Baker Mayfield out. And that's something that I stated earlier in the season with Baker Mayfield. Having Chris Godwin and Mike Evans on both ends as wide receivers is definitely going to help him out because if he can throw them any kind of balls at all, he's going to have success, and he has had success so far. So 3 games out of 4, he has had a guy to go to, but this time it was Chris Godwin. For the New Orleans Saints, Michael Thomas had 4 catches for 53 yards but didn't find the end zone. And Rashid Shaheed, the backup running back, had 3 catches for 33 yards as well. Like I said, not a great passing day for Derek Carr whatsoever. He did also have a fumble to go along with this game, so he'd had a turnover as well and not finding the end zone. He just didn't look like he was well. He toughed it out, but he just didn't look good. He just didn't look as good as he has in previous weeks. So looking at the NFC South, that puts Tampa Bay on top of things at 3-1, with Atlanta and New Orleans at 2-2, and Carolina at 0-4, still looking for their first win. So looking ahead to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers schedule, they're home against the Detroit Lions, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on October 15th on Fox. That's going to be a pretty good game. Because Detroit, they're solid, and we'll touch on them as well. This is two 3-1 teams going at it, and one of these teams is going to improve to 4-1 in the conference and kind of solidify themselves as a tougher team. So I'll have a prediction for you later in the week, but that game could go either way. But I like Detroit to win that game. Tampa Bay is then home the following Sunday against the Atlanta Falcons, October 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then they have the Thursday nighter, as I mentioned, at Buffalo, October 26th, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Prime Video. And I can see Tampa losing that game just because of the atmosphere and the quick turnaround. They're at Houston November 5th, 10 days later, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're home against the Tennessee Titans November 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS as well. So looking at Tampa's next 5 games, the Detroit game and the Buffalo game stick out as losses to me, but Atlanta, Houston, and Tennessee could be victories depending on how things go. So I could see them being 3-2 over the course of their next 5 games. We'll have to see how things shake out, but I can see them being 3-2 at worst over their next 5 games. Looking to the Saints here, on Sunday, they have to travel to New England to visit the Patriots November 8th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at the Houston Texans November 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They have a home game the following Thursday, and the Thursday nighter home against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then 10 days later, that following Sunday, October 29th, they're at the Indianapolis Colts, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then they're home against the Chicago Bears, 1 p.m. Eastern, November the 5th on CBS. Looking ahead, I can see that being a win, the Chicago game I just mentioned. I know that's about 5 weeks away, but Chicago to me is one of the worst 3 teams in the league by far. One of only 2 teams left that hasn't gotten a win, so that further proves that point. With the Saints and Patriots, that's interesting because the Patriots, they got dog walked by the Cowboys, but a lot of that was to do with Mac Jones's play. If New Orleans' defense can give him any kind of trouble as Dallas did, I'm not sure if they can, but if they can give him any kind of trouble, I could see them taking that game and getting off the schneid here. At Houston, I can see them winning that game as well, but you can't sleep on Houston. Houston's been fantastic so far. Home against Jacksonville for that quick Thursday night turnaround is going to be tough as well because Jacksonville, in that division as a whole, those teams have the potential of being really good or being really terrible. It's just a matter of the consistency and showing what they can truly do. So, as far as I'm concerned here, with the Jacksonville game, then they're at Indianapolis 10 days later and home against the Bears. The only games I could see the Saints being 2-3 over the course of their next 5 games. Again, I'll have predictions as each of those games gets closer, but 2-3, possibly 3-2 for the Saints. Derek Carr, if it's a situation where he has to get healthy, that means you're going to be leaning on Jameis Winston as your quarterback, and he could be very turnover prone. So that's going to make things difficult for the Saints, but we'll just have to see how things shake up. That division is not set in stone by any means, and so far, Tampa's the only team that's shown that they can really have a grasp on the season if they do what they need to do. The next game we're going to talk about here, an NFC East matchup that went into overtime, actually. The Philadelphia Eagles defeated the Washington Commanders 4-0. I'm sorry, 34-31. I was looking at the Eagles' record. The Eagles are now 4-0, and the Commanders have fallen to 2-2 after winning their first 2 games. Jalen Hurts he was 25 of 37 for 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, and also had 9 carries for 34 yards on the ground as well. Sam Howell was 29 of 41 for 290 yards with 1 touchdown to also go along with 6 carries for 40 yards as well. So it was it was actually a shootout as far as I'm concerned here. This game was actually pretty close with the score, with Washington actually leading at the half 17-10. They looked like they kind of had a stranglehold on this game, and then Philadelphia roared back, scoring 11 points in the third quarter. And that's where things got interesting as the game went on. But kudos to Washington. 3 of their 4 games they've played really well. I've said that already, but the blowout to Buffalo was the only game where they showed that they were kind of as a team. But they've played really well so far. Leading the cause as far as rushing the football for Philadelphia was DeAndre Swift with 14 carries for 56 yards and a touchdown. And for Washington, that was Brian Robinson Jr., who had 14 carries for 45 yards and a touchdown. As far as the receiving statistics here, A.J. Brown led all receivers with 9 catches for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. He definitely ate and was definitely involved in the offense. Devontae Smith had 7 catches for 78 yards, and tight end Dallas Goedert actually had a very quiet day with 2 catches for 25 yards. On the Washington side, Terry McLaurin, wide receiver, had 8 catches for 86 yards, but didn't find the end zone. De'Ami Brown had 2 catches for 51 yards, and wide receiver Curtis Samuel also had another 7 catches for 51 yards. Sam Howell did connect with 9 different receivers, but this ultimately, like I said, was a shootout, and Philadelphia was able to get the better of them, getting a field goal in overtime to win the game. So if you're Washington, no need to hang your head, but this definitely was a gut punch. And the Philadelphia Eagles, to me, they showed that at 4-0, it's them and San Francisco as far as the top teams in the division and the conference, with Dallas right below that at 3-1. Dallas and San Francisco is going to be a slugfest on Sunday, and we'll definitely have to see how that one shakes up. But as far as the Eagles, like I said, 4-0 right now. They're 2-0 at home, 2-0 on the road, and they're definitely looking like they're rolling from last year. They're at the Los Angeles Rams, as I mentioned, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on October 8th, Sunday on Fox. Then they're at the New York Jets, October 15th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox as well. Then they come home for Sunday Night Football, October 22nd, against the Miami Dolphins on NBC, October 22nd, 8:20 p.m. Eastern. The following week, they're at the Washington Commanders, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 29th, before coming home to face the Dallas Cowboys, November 5th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. These games are pretty interesting. They have a nice balance of talent that they're going toe-to-toe with. At the Rams, I can see them winning that game close, and then at the Jets, I see them winning that game going away. Things get interesting with the Miami Dolphins game on Sunday Night Football, October 22nd, and then they have 2 divisional matchups at Washington and home against Dallas after that. So I'll have better predictions as far as those games, but this schedule, this next 5 games, is actually going to be leading up to their bye week. It'll definitely let us know if Philadelphia is for real and if they want to go back to a Super Bowl or not. But as far as I'm concerned, looking at their schedule, they could be 3-2, 2-3, 3-2, 4-1. That's all in the cards for the Philadelphia Eagles because nothing is a gimme in this world. But at the same time, that Rams game could be an upset. You just never know. Dolphins game looks tough. At Washington is going to be tough because that's a divisional matchup, and they just played them tough last week. And at home against the Cowboys is going to be tough because of what we've seen on their defensive side of the football. So, if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, if you can win 4 out of 5, that'll let me know that you're for real. If you win all 5, then you're definitely for real. That'll put you at 9-0. That'll be nuts if Philadelphia can get to 9-0. So we'll just definitely have to see. But Philadelphia, they're neck and neck with San Fran right now. Excuse me. The next game we're going to talk about here was the Minnesota Vikings traveling to Carolina, defeating them 21-13 to get Minnesota their first win on the season as Carolina drops to 0-4. This game to me was really it was kind of nip and tuck until the third quarter, excuse me. When the Vikings got 2 touchdowns in the quarter, they got one on offense and one on defense. With Justin Jefferson getting a touchdown, he had 2 touchdowns for the game. And then DJ Wonnum had a 51-yard fumble return as well for a touchdown. So for Minnesota, they won this game with contributions enough on offense and defense. And with Carolina, their struggles just kind of continue. Kirk Cousins, this was probably his worst game statistically for Minnesota. He was only 12 of 19 for 139 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Again, for his worst game statistically as far as stat line. And as far as Bryce Young, he was 25 of 32 for Carolina for 204 yards, no touchdowns, no interception, excuse me. So Carolina, again, they have a couple of guys that can do things. Like Adam Thielen had 7 catches for 76 yards, but didn't find the end zone. He's easily their number one receiver coming over from Minnesota. And on the ground, Carolina only had 83 yards running the football. Chuba Hubbard with 14 carries, 41 yards. Miles Sanders, 13 carries, 19 yards. So just wasn't that great of a game for the offense as far as Carolina, even though the game's a lot closer than it indicated. It just took a while for Minnesota to get going, is what it seemed like. Alexander Madison, he rushed the ball for Minnesota with 17 carries for 95 yards. He didn't find the end zone. And Cam Akers also contributed with 5 carries for 40 yards. As far as receiving the ball for Minnesota, Justin Jefferson had 6 catches for 85 yards, 2 touchdowns. And tight end TJ Hawkins, he had 2 catches for 24 yards. He didn't find the end zone, and he had a very quiet day. Justin Jefferson was the only guy that got things going on the receiving end, as he had 85 of the 139 yards that Kirk Cousins had. So just a tough day for both teams, but Minnesota was able to squeak out that win and get themselves in the win column. Again, they're at the bottom of the NFC North at 1-3. Which actually I take that back. Chicago's at the bottom at 0-4. Minnesota's 1-3, and they have Green Bay ahead of them at 2-2, with Detroit leading the division at 3-1. Looking ahead to Minnesota's next 5 games, they're home against the Kansas City Chiefs, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, October 8th. They're at the Chicago Bears, 1 p.m. Eastern, no, October 15th on Fox for their Week 6 matchup. The following week, they have a Monday night football game home against the San Francisco 49ers at 8:15 p.m. Eastern, October 23rd. Then the following week, they're on the road at Green Bay, October 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Then they're at Atlanta, November 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. So I definitely got Minnesota losing the Kansas City game. That game just screams loss. Kansas City hasn't been as great as they've been in previous years, but I still think they're the better team. And they just kind of struggled getting out the box. We'll have to see with Kansas City here. At Chicago, Minnesota at Chicago, I got Minnesota winning that game. The Monday Night Football game against San Francisco is going to be tough as well. They'll probably lose that game. At Green Bay, at Atlanta, the following 2 weeks after that, I could definitely see Minnesota splitting those games and to put themselves that would put them at 2-3 over the course of the next 5 weeks. And I'll have an official prediction for them as you get closer to those games because again, things happen from week to week in the NFL. And injuries happen, players go down, things of that nature. So We'll have to see if we get closer to that game. The Carolina Panthers are at Detroit this coming Sunday, October 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then they're at Miami on October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Those are probably losses for them. They're home against the Houston Texans October 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They're home against the Indianapolis Colts November 5th, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at Chicago November 9th for a Thursday night football matchup. November 9th, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Amazon Prime. That's going to be a rough game to watch, but hey, somebody's gonna have to win that one. Carolina, I could see them losing all of these games. Houston and Indianapolis, they're at home for those games, so they could take one of those two, but their best chance is at Chicago, interestingly enough, and that's not till November, that's another 4 or 5 games away, so that's rough. But as I've stated already, Carolina is playing for a lottery pick, and they're playing for a high draft pick. The key is having a worse record than Chicago at this point because they're both 0-4 right now. And whichever team of those two teams is the worst is going to get the number one pick most likely. Unless another NFC team just starts being awful out of nowhere. But that game is going to determine probably who's going to get the number one pick November 9th. We'll just have to see for that. But Carolina, they're in trouble. They're not going to be built to be good for a while. So that's just going to be how it is for that team. We'll just have to see how things shake out. The next game we're going to talk about here on the docket here was sorry about that. The Steelers and Texans here. The Texans defeated the Steelers 30-6 going away and a romp. That game was never close at any point. The Texans led that game 16-0 at half, and they scored 14 points in the fourth quarter. CJ Stroud was 16 of 30 for 306 yards and 2 touchdowns and ran the ball 4 times for 16 yards. Kenny Pickett was 15 of 23 for 114 yards and an interception before leaving the game in the third quarter with a knee injury. They're saying that it's an MCL and they're taking it day to day. Mitch Trubisky came in relief of him and was 3 of 5 for 18 yards, but didn't find the end zone. Running the football, Houston Texans running back Dameon Pierce was 24 of 81, 24 carries for 81 yards, but didn't find the end zone. And Devin Singletary also added 7 carries for 25 yards. For Pittsburgh, Najee Harris had 14 carries for 71 yards, while Jalen Warren added 8 carries for 29 yards. They had 114 yards on the ground as a whole. So they weren't completely dominated, but in the receiving game, that's where you can definitely see a difference because the top 2 receivers for Pittsburgh were running backs. Najee Harris had 1 catch for 32 yards, and Jalen Warren had 6 catches for 26 yards. George Pickens had 3 catches for 25 yards, and he led all wide receivers with just 25 receiving yards. For Houston, however, Nico Collins had 7 catches for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns, and tight end Dalton Schultz had 3 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown as well. Houston Texans, they looked really good, and as far as I'm concerned, that my early predictions on them may have been wrong. This team looked really good. They definitely just have shown a lot in these last 2 weeks. They were off to an 0-2 start, losing to Baltimore and Indy respectively, but they looked really good last week, blowing out the Jacksonville Jaguars and then doing the same against Pittsburgh. They've outscored their opponents the last 2 weeks at a combined score of 67-23. So CJ Stroud looks like he's starting to get it. Will Anderson on defense, he was humming, doing his thing as well. And the Houston Texans, we're going to have to wait and see what they are because the first 2 weeks they looked like they were going to be terrible. The last 2 weeks they looked like a juggernaut. It's going to be tough. They're at the Atlanta Falcons Sunday, October 8th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They're home against the New Orleans Saints October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox as well. They're home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 1 p.m. Eastern on November the 5th on CBS. The following week, they're at the Cincinnati Bengals November 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're home against the Arizona Cardinals 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS as well. So, again, the Texans, we're just going to have to wait and see what they are and kind of just prognosticate how things are going to go for them. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I had a lot of high hopes for this team here, and I had this team being one of the top teams in the league, but we might just have to back up on that prognostication. They only had 6 points in there, and all was scored in the third quarter by Chris Boswell. For me, this team, luckily for them, they have other teams in their division struggling, but we'll just have to see what they are. Baltimore leads things at 3-1, and they're sitting with Cleveland at 2-2, with Cincinnati at 1-3. They're home against the Baltimore Ravens, 1 p.m. Eastern on October 8th before they head into their bye week, week 6. Then they're at the Rams October 22nd, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They're at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars October 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern before their Thursday nighter home against the Tennessee Titans November 2nd, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Amazon Prime. Then 10 days later, they're home against the Green Bay Packers November 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. This next 5 games here could definitely tell the tale of where this team is going as far as not only their path towards the playoffs, but the possible changes within the organization. Because this next 6 weeks here, looking at these games, none of these games are gimmies for the Pittsburgh Steelers. When you're losing the way that you did to a Houston Texans team that I picked them to beat this team early and this past weekend. It just doesn't spell well for your season. If the Pittsburgh Steelers can be a 4-1 team optimistically, that'll keep them in the mix, but if they lose these next couple of games, specifically with Baltimore and then the bye week and then the Rams, that's gonna really begin to kinda let you know that they're not gonna be in it, but we'll just have to see for the Pittsburgh Steelers for sure, but that this team, I have them being a great team, and they just haven't shown it. So, we'll have to see with them. Another game that we're gonna talk about here that occurred over the weekend, on Sunday was an AFC West matchup between the Los Angeles Chargers with them defeating the Las Vegas Raiders 24-17. They actually scored all 24 of their points in the first half and didn't score anything in the second half. Justin Herbert was 13 of 24 for 167 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception, but he had 12 carries for 27 yards and 2 touchdowns, so he did the majority of his damage on the ground. And quarterback Aiden O'Connell, who was in place of Jimmy Garoppolo, who was out with a concussion, he was 24 of 39 for the Raiders with 238 yards, but no touchdowns and 1 interception. Josh Jacobs running the football was 17 of carries for 58 yards with a touchdown, and Aiden O'Connell did run in the football for a 3-yard touchdown of his own. So he had a touchdown on the ground, but didn't throw any touchdowns. As far as running the football, neither team really was dominant, but Joshua Kelly did have 17 carries for 65 yards, and Darius Davis had 3 carries for 51 yards. So they had long carries, but they just weren't consistent with it. They did get the 2 touchdowns, but those again were from Justin Herbert. As far as the receiving statistics here, Joshua Palmer led all receivers with for 3 catches for 77 yards, but didn't find the end zone for Los Angeles. That actually belonged to Keenan Allen, who had 3 catches for 32 yards and a touchdown. For receiving here, Josh Jacobs, the running back, actually surprisingly led the Raiders with 8 catches for 81 yards, but didn't find the end zone. And Devontae Adams had 8 catches for 75 yards, but didn't find the end zone either. So this game to me was just more of like Los Angeles having control of the game early and just never relinquishing it. The Raiders are falling to 1-3 alongside the Denver Broncos, and with Kansas City leading the AFC West at 3-1. The Chargers are 2-2, and they're home after their bye week, week 5. They're off this coming weekend. So the following weekend, October 16th, they're home against the Cowboys for Monday Night Football, October 16th. The following Sunday, they're at the Kansas City Chiefs, October 22nd, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They're home against the Chicago Bears, October 29th, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC. Then they have another Monday Night Football matchup at the New York Jets, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, November 6th. Then they're home against the Detroit Lions that following Sunday, November 12th, 2:05 p.m. Eastern. The Chargers are another one of those teams where I just don't know what they are. I could see them losing to Dallas and Kansas City and bouncing back to win against Chicago and New York, which would put them at 4-4. That's just what the Chicago or what the Los Angeles Chargers are to me. As far as the Raiders, I just don't think, as I've said before, they're not really a factor to me. They're home against the Green Bay Packers October 9th. That's 6 days away from Monday Night Football. The following Sunday, they're home against the New England Patriots October 15th at 4:05 p.m. Eastern. Then they're at Chicago October 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox before heading to Detroit October 30th, 8:15 p.m. Eastern for a Monday Night Football matchup that day as well. The Raiders not going to be a factor, and I could see them beating Chicago. And then the Giants, November 5th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern, maybe. They could come up with something to beat Chicago, but the Raiders aren't a factor. They're gonna have a high draft pick too, depending on their picking situation, but the Raiders aren't a factor. And with the Chargers, we're just gonna have to see what they are. This game, there's not much to talk about with this one at all. The Cowboys destroyed the Patriots 38-3. The offense, again, for Dallas didn't have to do much. Dak Prescott was 28 of 34 for 261 yards and a touchdown. But as a whole, they didn't have to do much on offense. A lot of that came from the defensive side of the football. Tony Pollard had 11 carries for 47 yards, but didn't find the end zone. Mac Jones, for as far as passing the ball for New England, was 12 of 21 for 150 yards, two interceptions. He didn't find the end zone at all, and New England as a whole didn't find the end zone. It was just a rough day as a whole. New England falling to 1-3. And that was the worst loss of Belichick's coaching career, that 38-3 loss of his entire storied career, his worst loss ever. As far as the Dallas Cowboys, they're looking ahead already to Sunday. The Sunday night football matchup here with the 49ers, that's going to be a lot of fun, and we're definitely going to see who's really going to run that whole division. The following week, they're at the Los Angeles Chargers, as I just mentioned, with their schedule for Monday Night Football, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, October 16th. Then they hit their bye week in Week 7. The following week, they're home against on October 29th against the Los Angeles Rams, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then they're at the Philadelphia Eagles November 5th at 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox before returning home against the New York Giants, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Once we get past the San Francisco game, we'll have a better idea of who the Cowboys are. Um, but with the 49ers and Eagles withstanding, I can see this team being 3-2 over 5 games, even if they did lose to the Niners, excuse me, and the Eagles. So, but if they want to keep pace in the NFC, they have to win one of those, the Dallas Cowboys. They have to win one of those games in order to keep pace. As far as the Patriots, they're home against the New Orleans Saints this coming Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They're at the Las Vegas Raiders October 15th, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They're home against Buffalo October 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at the Miami Dolphins October 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS before returning home to face the Washington Commanders, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. The Patriots haven't shown me anything. They're 1-3 for a reason, and this could be a situation where they have a high draft pick again. In all honesty, I just don't know what the Patriots are. And week to week, we'll have a better idea. But they're probably going to be picking high, much like the Bears and the Panthers in the NFC. They're just not a factor. Another game that got wild really late here, the 49ers, they improved to 4-0 as they defeated the Arizona Cardinals 35-16. Brock Purdy was 20 of 21, only with one incompletion, with 283 yards and one touchdown. Christian McCaffrey was the story, however, here with 20 carries for 106 yards and three touchdowns, and then 7 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown. So he had 4 touchdowns in total for the day. Joshua Dobbs of Arizona was 28 of 41 for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns, both to receiver Michael Wilson, who had 7 catches and 76 yards. He was very feisty and he played very well. As far as running the football here, James Conner for Arizona had 11 carries for 52 yards, and quarterback Joshua Dobbs had another 12 carries for 48 yards. He was definitely doing both things, running and passing, but San Francisco was just a better team. Brandon Ayuk had 6 catches for 148 yards for San Francisco, but didn't find the end zone. He was pretty spectacular as well. And interestingly enough, Deebo Samuel for San Francisco didn't have a single catch, which was odd to me. But he does something. They just have so many pieces all over the San Francisco 49ers that it's kind of odd that Deebo Samuel will be forgotten to somebody else. But with this team, it's not that odd, unfortunately. Like I just mentioned here, they're home against the Dallas Cowboys here for Sunday Night Football, October 8th. The following week, they're at the Cleveland Browns, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 15th. Then they have a Monday Night Football game at the Minnesota Vikings, October 23rd, 8:15 p.m. Eastern on ABC, before returning home to face the Cincinnati Bengals, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. and then they're at the Jacksonville Jaguars following their bye week on November the 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. So as I just mentioned with Dallas, once San Francisco gets past that game, we'll have a better idea of who they are. But their 5-game lineup shakes to be much easier because if they beat Dallas, I could see them beating Cleveland, Minnesota, Cincinnati, and Jacksonville. That would make them a 9-0 football team. I mean, things happen from week to week, but San Francisco just looks unstoppable, and I honestly think they could be a better team, which is pretty scary. The next game we're going to talk about is actually the Sunday night football matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the New York Jets, with them winning the game, squeaking by 23-20. There was a point where they led this game 17-0 before the Jets squeaked back and tied the game in the third quarter. Patrick Mahomes actually had a pretty shaky day, 18 of 30 for 203 yards with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. To Zach Wilson for the Jets, he was 28 of 39 for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was actually Patrick Mahomes' first game in his career where the other quarterback had more completions, more yards, and more touchdowns. That had never happened in Patrick Mahomes' career until this past Sunday. So that's very interesting. That just goes to show you how great Patrick Mahomes is. As far as running the football, Isaiah Pacheco had 20 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown to also go along with carrying the ball 3 carries for 43 yards, for catching the ball 3 catches, 43 yards. Patrick Mahomes did carry the ball 7 carries for 51 yards, and the last 2 carries of the football were the most pivotal. That's what got them the game and sealed things up. For the New York Jets, Breece Hall had 6 carries for 56 yards. Dalvin Cook had 5 carries for 16 yards. They had 108 yards on the ground as a team. And, for New York, again, I keep saying the Aaron Rodgers effect, this team expected more, but that's just how it's going to be with this team. Alan Lazard did have 3 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown for the Jets in a losing effort. And Travis Kelce had 6 catches for 60 yards at tight end for the Chiefs, but didn't find the end zone. I'm looking ahead to the Chiefs and their schedule. They improved to 3-1 as they head to Minnesota on Sunday, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. They have a home game against the Denver Broncos that following Thursday, October 12th at 8:15 p.m. Eastern. That'll definitely be a win for them. They don't lose to Denver these days. 10 days later, they're home against the Los Angeles Chargers, October 22nd, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. And then again, they're at the Denver Broncos, October 29th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Before traveling overseas to face the Miami Dolphins in Germany at Frankfurt Stadium. That's November the 5th. So like I said, the Kansas City Chiefs with their schedule, they had that hiccup early against Detroit, but I just don't see them losing these games until they get to Miami. They'll beat Minnesota, they'll beat Denver twice, and they'll beat the Chargers. We'll have to see how things are in Germany because there's no home field with that Dolphins game. So that'll be a whooping, and I just don't see them losing beyond in the month of October at all, as far as the Chiefs go. I'm looking ahead to the Jets. Zach Wilson, to me, he definitely played a lot better, and he definitely showed he has what it takes. But is he the future? Well, we'll have to see. I want to see how he plays against the Denver Broncos this Sunday, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. The following week, he's home against the Philadelphia Eagles, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. Then they're at the New York Giants. They both play in the same stadium, but that's a road game for them. They're home against the Chargers for Monday Night Football, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, November 6th, before their Sunday Night Football game at the Las Vegas Raiders, 8:20 p.m. Eastern, November 12th. The Jets, hey, they showed they got some fight even with that loss, but that loss is going to eat at them because they had a chance to win that football game. But the Jets, they just might be playing for next year. That's just how it's going to probably have to shake up for them as far as their schedule. But the Chiefs, to me, is still Super Bowl or bust. They're still a dominant team, and they still just are working kinks out, but they're still going to be good to go. The final game we're going to talk about before we close up the broadcast here, the Monday Night Football game that occurred last night, that was between the Seattle Seahawks and New York Giants, and it was never close. They won by a score of 24-3, sending the Giants to 1-3 as the Seahawks improved to 3-1. Geno Smith was only 13 of 20 for 110 yards and a touchdown, and he just didn't really have to do much. He ended up leaving the game late in the game because of a wrist injury. So Drew Lock was 2 of 6 for 63 yards and spelling him. For New York, the Giants, Daniel Jones was 27 of 34 for 203 yards, and he had 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. And he was also their leading rusher at 10 carries for 66 yards. What ended this game was him throwing a 97-yard pick six to Devin Witherspoon in the third quarter. That's what broke this game up and gave Seattle a 21-3 lead. That's essentially what did it for them because it was 14-3 and they were driving in the red zone, but that turnover just ended things for them. Their leading receiver for the Seattle Seahawks was Noah Fant with 2 catches for 63 yards. Tyler Lockett had 4 catches for 54 yards, and DK Metcalf had 3 catches for 34 yards with a touchdown. For the New York Giants, Matt Breida, the running back, he was their leading receiver with 5 catches for 48 yards, and Wan'Dale Robinson also contributed 5 catches for 40 yards. This New York Giants team they're bad. I just don't know how else to put that. I think that we just kind of got enamored with what they did last season, being a 9-8 football team, getting into the playoffs and winning against Minnesota. I just don't think the Giants are a viable team this year, and I honestly think they're the worst team in the NFC East by far. Because again, Washington is 2-2, but they're a good 2-2 football team. They're definitely better than the Giants. Looking at Seattle here, they're at the Cincinnati Bengals October 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're home the next couple of games. They're home against the Arizona Cardinals October 22nd at 4:05 p.m. Eastern. Then they're home against the Cleveland Browns October 29th, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox as well, before traveling to Baltimore to face the Ravens November the 5th, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're home against the Washington Commanders November 12th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Realistically, if Seattle can get this Cincinnati game based on Joe Burrow and what he's able to do, if they can get this game, they'll be in the house until they see San Francisco later in November. We'll touch on that later because those games come later in the season and things are going to happen between now and then. But Seattle is sitting pretty at 3-1 right now. And over the course of the next 5 games, I can see them at worst being 3-2. At worst. Things happen, like I said, week to week. So we'll just have to see. But Seattle, they're going to be sitting pretty. I can see them sitting right there with San Francisco. I don't know if they'll overtake them, but they'll be right there with San Francisco. And as far as the rest of that division, Arizona, they have some fight to them, but they're just not going to be a factor. And the Rams, they got some fight to them too. So if you're Seattle, you're sitting pretty right now, but you got to maintain that perch. Before we get out of here, let's talk about the Giants and talk about what their schedule looks like over the next 5 games because things are going to be very shaky for them. They're at the Dolphins on Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then October 15th, they have a Sunday night football game at the Buffalo Bills, 8:20 p.m. Eastern on NBC. They're home the next couple of games following that against the Washington Commanders, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 22nd on CBS. Then they're home against the New York Jets, 1 p.m. Eastern, October 29th on CBS before traveling to Vegas to take on the Las Vegas Raiders, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on November the 5th. Man, they're really going to need Saquon Barkley back. Getting Saquon Barkley back is going to be the key because Daniel Jones, he's not a $40 million guy, but they're stuck with him at least this season and next season before they can get from under him as far as that contract. But I don't see them beating Miami or Buffalo because they're on the road for those games. I don't see them beating them. And like I said, Washington is a better team than them, so they could lose their next few games. The Jets game, I stated something in previous broadcasts that I may have to retract. I stated that would be the first time that the Giants would have the better quarterback this season facing the Jets. Not so fast because Zach Wilson had a better game in a loss than Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones was a disaster and he contributed directly to that loss. Whereas Zach Wilson, he was actually the better quarterback than Mahomes, but the Chiefs squeaked by with the win because of a late turnover. So for the Jets game, he's not going to feel like he's on the road at all. Zach Wilson, whether it's Zach Wilson or Daniel Jones, that's not really a road game because they share that stadium. So they could even lose to the Jets. And then at the Raiders are a disaster themselves, but somebody has to win that game. So if you're the Giants, you're going from having a divisional round spot to possibly picking in the top 10 in the draft. That's not a good turnaround, but it just may be what they need, as far as I'm concerned. It just may be what they need. So that definitely takes care of today's broadcast. We definitely went through all the Sunday games and the Monday night matchup as well here. I thank you for joining me. The next broadcast is going to be on Thursday. It's going to be an abbreviated broadcast. Typically, Thursdays are going to be more abbreviated because we're going to talk about the Thursday night game coming up here between the Chicago Bears at 0-4, visiting the Washington Commanders at 2-2. I'll have a prediction for you before that game gets started. And then the following Sunday, I won't be broadcasting this Sunday, October 8th, as I'll be heading to the Broncos game. So I'll kind of touch on a little bit as much as I can as far as the week's games coming up on Sunday and Monday Night Football. But that following Tuesday, I'll definitely have a bigger broadcast for you, and we'll go over all the games, including the Thursday night result, all the Sunday results, and the Monday Night Football game. So you can expect that next Tuesday. But my next broadcast again will be Thursday. I'll again be previewing the game between the Bears and the Commanders, and I'll have a prediction for you as to who I think is going to win that game. All right, so that's going to wrap things up here for the Hype Show. Thank you so much for joining me here. This was a slightly longer episode, but we definitely had a lot to cover. And again, I'll be joining you guys on Thursday for another episode. That's going to be abbreviated, but I'll be talking about as much football as I can for you. Thank you so much here, and this is the Hype Show. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good night.